Morning came slow and golden over the Carter ranch. The first rays of light spilled across the wooden floorboards, touching Clara's face as she woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the creak of barn doors. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The soft quilt, the smell of coffee, the hum of quiet life, it felt too gentle to be real. Then the memories returned: the auction, the laughter, Eli's steady voice saying, "My son needs you." She sat up, pressing her hands against her face, whispering a prayer of thanks she barely knew how to say. When she stepped into the kitchen, Eli was already there, shirt sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. A pot of oats bubbled on the stove. The air smelled like wood smoke and peace. "Mornin', Miss Clara," he said with a faint smile. "Sleep all right?" She nodded. "I did it. Quiet here." "Quiet's a blessing," he replied, sliding a cup toward her, "especially after all you've been through." Before she could answer, a small sound came from the doorway, a hesitant creak, like someone half-height. She turned and saw Tommy, barefoot, his hair sticking up like wild straw, clutching his wooden horse again. His gray eyes peeked around the doorframe. Clara smiled softly. "Good morning, Tommy." He didn't speak, didn't move either, just stared at her, cautious as a deer at the edge of a field. Eli looked toward him, his face a mix of sadness and patience. "He'll come around," he murmured. "He used to talk all day long. Now he just don't." Clara's gaze lingered on the boy. There was a hollowness there she recognized too well, the same silence she'd lived in since losing her own husband. She knew what it was to be swallowed by grief. After breakfast, Eli headed out to mend the fence line, leaving Clara alone with the boy. She washed dishes, humming softly, not for him to hear, just to keep herself company. But when she glanced over her shoulder, Tommy had crept closer, the wooden horse still tight in his hand. "You like music?" she asked gently. He blinked but didn't answer. "I used to sing when I worked," she went on, drying a plate. "My little one, she'd fall asleep listening." Her throat tightened. She hadn't said those words aloud in years. She placed the plate down, wiped her hands on her apron, and sat on the floor beside him. "Want to help me with something?" Tommy hesitated. Clara reached into her satchel and pulled out a small carving knife, dull and harmless but good enough for wood. "I was thinking your horse might need a friend. Maybe a cow or a dog. What do you think?" Tommy's eyes flickered, interest sparking for the first time. Slowly, he stepped closer and sat down beside her. Together, they began to shape a small piece of driftwood. Clara guided his hand, careful and slow. "See, you're doing fine," she said. "Smooth strokes, gentle." He didn't smile, but he didn't pull away either. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore, it was peaceful, filled with the sound of wood scraping and the faint hum of her voice. By the time Eli returned, the two were sitting by the window, and a rough little wooden dog sat in Tommy's lap. The boy looked up, met his father's eyes, and for a fleeting second, there was warmth there. Eli froze in the doorway, disbelief flickering across his face. Clara looked up too, her cheeks flushed with the glow of small victory. "He helped me make it," she said softly. "Didn't you, Tommy?" The boy gave the faintest nod. Eli's eyes softened. "That's the first I've seen him do that for a long while." After supper, when the lamps were low and the air hummed with crickets, Eli found Clara on the porch, mending a shirt by lantern light. "You've got away with him," he said quietly. "Never thought I'd see him sit beside anyone again." She looked up from her stitching. "He just needs gentleness." "So do you." Eli smiled faintly, his eyes meeting hers in the golden lamplight. "Maybe we all do." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like the land after rain. Inside, Tommy fell asleep holding the wooden dog in his arms. Outside, the stars spread wide and clear across the open sky. Clara tilted her head back, watching them glitter, and for the first time since she'd been sold, chained, and shamed, she didn't feel broken. She felt like she'd been placed exactly where she needed to be. The weeks drifted by, soft as wind through wheat. What had once been Eli's quiet, grief-filled ranch began to breathe again, gently, almost shyly. Clara settled into the rhythm of work and dawns, the smell of horses and coffee, the sound of Tommy's small footsteps trailing behind her wherever she went. She rose before sunrise, baking bread, sweeping floors, and humming to herself. The house no longer echoed with loneliness. There was warmth now, stew simmering on the stove, laughter from the chicken yard, the creak of a rocking chair by the hearth. But beyond the ranch house, not everyone approved. The ranch hands, rough men who'd worked for Eli since before his wife's passing, watched Clara with wary eyes. Jed, the eldest of them, spat tobacco into the dirt and muttered, "Don't trust her, boss. You can take the girl out of the auction, but you can't wash that off her." Eli didn't answer at first. He just leaned against the corral fence, gaze steady on the horizon. "You done talking, Jed?" he asked quietly. Jed frowned, caught off guard. "Just looking out for you, sir. She's trouble. Folks in town are still laughing about how you bought yourself a bride in chains." Eli turned his head slowly. "I didn't buy a bride, I freed a woman. There's a difference." Jed opened his mouth, but Eli's tone cut through the morning air, firm and final. "She stays. She's under my protection. Anyone got a problem with that can take their pay and ride on." Jed fell silent, jaw tight. The other men lowered their eyes. From the porch, Clara had heard every word. Her hands trembled around the buckets she was carrying. No one had ever stood up for her like that, not since her husband died. The weight of Eli's quiet loyalty hit her like a wave. That night, she brought him supper by the fire, beef stew and cornbread, the best she could make with what the pantry held. Eli looked up, surprised. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "I wanted to," she replied. "For what you said today." Eli nodded, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "Didn't do nothing special, just told the truth." Clara sat down across from him, the firelight flickering between them. "The truth's a rare thing," she murmured. "Most folks don't bother with it when it costs them friends." He stirred his stew slowly. "Maybe, but I stopped worrying about friends when my wife passed. The ones who mattered stayed. The ones who didn't, well, they were never mine to lose." A quiet moment stretched between them. The flames crackled, throwing warm light over the worn lines of his face. Clara saw, not just a rancher, but a man who'd known loss deeper than words could say and still chose kindness. "Eli," she said, after a while, "why did you say your son needed me? You didn't know me. I could have been anyone." He set down his spoon and met her eyes. "Because he needed someone with a gentle heart. I saw that in you, even when you stood there in chains. You looked scared, not angry. People who still get scared haven't gone hard yet. There's hope in that." Her throat tightened. "You saw hope in me." He smiled faintly. "I saw someone still fighting to stay kind in a world that ain't kind back. That's rarer than gold." Clara looked away, blinking back tears. Outside, the wind sighed against the shutters. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt seen. The next morning, she found a small pile of split firewood by the back door, more than she could ever carry. A note lay on top. "Thank you for the stew." That simple act warmed her more than the fire inside. Later that day, Tommy came running into the kitchen, holding up a small drawing, a stick figure of him, his father, and Clara holding hands. She gasped softly, kneeling to look at it. "Did you draw this, sweetheart?" He nodded shyly, his cheeks pink. Eli stepped into the doorway, his gaze falling on the drawing. Something in his expression shifted, hope flickering, where grief had once lived. "He's talking more," Clara said gently. "He said my name this morning." Eli's jaw clenched, his eyes wet. "Did he now?" Clara smiled. "He did." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, hearts full of words they didn't yet know how to say. And though the town still whispered, though the ranch hands still doubted, one thing was clear: kindness had begun to take root in a place once barren. The afternoon sun blazed over the small frontier town of Red Creek, burning through the dust that clung to every board, every face, every breath. Flies swarmed around the crowd gathered in the square, their laughter sharp as the crack of a whip. In the middle of it all stood a raised wooden platform, the auction block, and upon it a woman in chains. Her name was Clara Mae Dawson. Once, she'd been a wife, a mother, a woman with soft hands and Sunday dreams. But all of that had been buried with her husband after the fever took him. Debts followed, then men without mercy. Now she stood barefoot, wrists bound, her dress torn at the shoulder, her hair hanging like a curtain over her face to hide the shame in her eyes. "Step up, folks," the auctioneer barked, slapping his hat against his leg. "A rare prize today. A strong young widow can cook, clean, and do what's needed. Start in, bid at $10. Laughter rippled through the crowd like wildfire. "10 for that," a man shouted. "I wouldn't pay 10 cents. Another hollered. "Maybe she'll smile if the price gets high enough." The crowd roared, and Clara's cheeks burned. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to run, but the iron around her wrists bit deep. Her gaze swept across the faces, hungry, mocking, cruel. Not one pair of eyes held mercy. "Come on now," the auctioneer cackled. "Don't be shy. A fine woman don't come up for sale every day." The laughter grew, and Clara's heart sank lower with every sneer. Somewhere, behind the jeering, she heard the clink of spurs and the slow, steady tread of boots against the dirt. A man stepped out from the shadows, his hat brim low, coat worn from years of wind and work. The auctioneer smirked. "Well, look who's here, Eli Carter, the lonely rancher himself. Lost his wife 2 winters ago. Ain't that right, Eli? You look in for company." The crowd howled. Clara flinched. The man didn't answer right away, just lifted his gaze, and for the first time, she saw his eyes. They were gray as storm clouds, steady, quiet, and full of something she hadn't seen in years. Compassion. "How much?" Eli's voice was low. And it silenced the laughter for a heartbeat. The auctioneer blinked. "You serious, Carter? She ain't much use for a ranch. Got spirit, maybe too much." Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. Coins clattered onto the table. "That's all I got. Should cover it." The auctioneer hesitated. The crowd murmured. "You sure you want her?" Someone jeered. "Looks like trouble more than help." Eli's gaze didn't waver. "My boy needs someone," he said simply. "He hasn't spoken since his mama died. Maybe he needs her." The laughter died right there. The wind stirred the dust, and for a moment, even the auctioneer didn't have words. He shrugged, scooped up the coins, and spat into the dirt. "She's yours." Clara's breath caught. The man walked toward her, slow and sure. When he reached the platform, he looked up at her, not like a buyer, not like a man claiming property, but like someone seeing a soul that wasn't gone yet. He pulled a key from his pocket, handed to him by the auctioneer, and unlocked the cuffs himself. The iron fell away with a dull clink, leaving red marks on her wrist. He didn't touch her. He just said, "You're free to walk if you want, but if you've got nowhere else, my ranch could use a pair of kind hands." Clara stared at him, too stunned to speak. The crowd was watching, some with disgust, others with confusion. One man muttered, "He's lost his mind." Another whispered, "Maybe he's got a heart left after all." Eli turned, leading his horse from the hitching post. Then he looked back once more. "You cumin, Miss?" Clara hesitated, looking down at her bare feet, at the blood on her wrists. She thought of running, of vanishing into the wild plains, but where would she go? There was nothing waiting for her except hunger and danger. And something in his voice, quiet, steady, warm, called to the small flicker of hope she thought was long dead. She nodded, just once, and stepped off the platform. The crowd parted as she passed. Silent now, their laughter swallowed by shame. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with golden fire as she climbed onto the horse behind Eli Carter. For the first time in years, Clara felt the wind on her face and realized she was leaving the place of her chains behind. And as they rode away, someone in the crowd whispered, "He didn't buy her. He saved her." The trail out of Red Creek stretched long and lonely, winding through hills painted red by the dying sun. A wind moved through the sagebrush, carrying the smell of dust and smoke. Clara rode behind Eli Carter, her hands gripping the back of his worn coat, her heart pounding like hooves on hard earth. She hadn't spoken a word since the auction, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how to anymore. Words had failed her too many times before. Eli's horse, a gray gelding named Dusty, trotted steady across the land. Every now and then, Eli glanced over his shoulder, making sure she was all right. "We'll be home before night," he said quietly, his voice deep and calm, as if talking to the wind itself. Clara nodded faintly, though she wasn't sure what home meant anymore. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Why did you do it?" Her voice cracked, dry from dust and disbelief. Eli slowed the horse, letting the question hang between them. "Because no one else would." She frowned. "You don't even know me." He gave a small shrug. "Don't need to. I saw enough to know you didn't belong in chains." His words struck something deep inside her, something tender she'd thought was gone. She lowered her gaze, watching the ground blur beneath them. "You spent your last coin," she whispered. "For me." Eli nodded. "Money can come again. But my boy," he hesitated, his voice softening. "He needs someone gentle, someone to remind him what kindness sounds like. Your boy, Tommy, he's 6. Stopped talking after his mama passed. Used to sing to the chickens. Now he won't even look at me. Been 2 years. Clara's eyes filled, though she didn't let them fall. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Eli said. "I figure maybe you understand what loss feels like." Clara looked at him then, really looked. His face was weathered and strong, the lines around his eyes carved by sun and sorrow. He wasn't a man of charm or finery, he was a man of heart, plain and steady, and that steadiness made her chest ache. They reached the Carter Ranch just as the sun melted into purple dusk. The land spread wide in wild fenced pastures, an old barn, and a small wooden house that leaned against the horizon like it had seen too many storms. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a dog barked once, then quieted. Eli dismounted and held out his hand to help her down. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was rough but gentle, his grip sure. "Welcome home," he said softly. The word home made her throat tighten. She'd once had a home, a cabin with wildflowers by the door, laughter in the mornings, and a husband who smelled of pine and hope. Now all she had was the ghost of that life and a stranger offering her a place to rest. Inside, the small cabin was simple wood floors, a rocking chair, a faded quilt, and a Bible on the shelf. A single candle flickered on the table. In the corner stood a little boy with big gray eyes, clutching a toy horse to his chest. "Tommy," Eli said gently, "this is Miss Clara. She's going to be staying with us for a while." The boy didn't answer. He just stared at her, half hidden behind his father's leg. Clara knelt slowly, keeping her voice soft. "That's a fine horse you've got there." Tommy's eyes flickered, curious but silent. "I used to carve horses," she said, forcing a small smile. "If you'd like, I could make one for you too." He didn't move, but his tiny hand loosened on the toy. "Just a little." Eli cleared his throat. "He'll warm up to you. Takes time." He motioned toward a small room off the kitchen. "You can sleep there. It ain't much, but it's yours." Clara stepped inside. The bed was small, covered with an old patchwork quilt. There was a vase with a single dried flower on the windowsill. It wasn't grand, but it was clean and safe. She sank onto the bed, running her fingers over the quilts, stitching. For the first time in years, she wasn't behind bars or under someone's command. For the first time, she wasn't being watched for weaknesses. She was being given space to breathe. Outside, she could hear Eli stoking the fire, and Tommy's soft footsteps. The scent of stew drifted in, and her stomach growled. When Eli called her to eat, she joined them at the table. They bowed their heads. Eli prayed in a quiet voice, "Thank you, Lord, for another day and for new beginnings." Clara's hands trembled. No one had prayed with her since her husband died. When she lifted her eyes, Eli was looking at her not with pity, not with ownership, but with quiet respect. And in that moment, under the flicker of lamplight, something shifted in her heart. She still didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, she felt the faintest whisper of freedom. Spring came softly to the Carter Ranch, dressing the hills in green and gold. The air smelled of wildflowers, rain, and promise. For a time, it almost seemed like the world had forgotten its cruelty. Clara had never known such peace. Each morning, she rose with the dawn, made biscuits, and watched the sunlight spill across the valley. Tommy chased chickens, laughing, while Eli worked the fields with a steadiness that calmed her fears. But beneath that peace, a quiet current of longing ran between them, something neither dared name aloud. One evening, Eli came in from the barn later than usual, hat in hand, shirt damp with sweat and twilight dust. Clara was at the stove, stirring stew. The glow of the fire lit her face, and for a moment he simply stood there, caught by the gentleness of the scene. She turned, smiling shyly. "Long day, long but good," he said, hanging his hat. "Fences mended, cattle'll hold now." She ladled stew into 2 bowls. "Sit down, Eli, you've worked enough for one day." He hesitated. "You shouldn't be serving me like this. You've done plenty already." Clara gave him a look that was part humor, part tenderness. "It's not serving, it's supper. Now sit before it gets cold." He did, smiling faintly as he obeyed. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds, the soft clink of spoons and the wind outside. Then, Eli spoke quietly. "You know, I was thinking today about how things used to be before all this." Clara's gaze lifted. "Before your wife passed." He nodded. "Sarah was kind, quiet, like you. She had this way of making a house feel like more than wood and nails. You've got that same gift. Clara, the place feels alive again." Her hand stilled around her bowl. "You shouldn't say that. I could never replace her." Eli looked at her, eyes steady and soft. "I ain't asking you to. Some folks can't be replaced. But that don't mean there ain't room in a heart for something new." Clara's breath caught. Her heart thudded against her ribs, wild and uncertain. She whispered. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, voice low. "I ain't a man of fancy words, Clara, but you should know. I care for you. More than I meant to, more than I thought I ever could again." She looked down, tears shining in her lashes. "No one's ever said that to me. Not like that. Not with truth behind it. I mean every word." His voice was rough, but there was a tenderness in it that made her tremble. "You've brought light to me and my boy. You've healed things I didn't even know were still broken." She wiped her eyes, smiling shakily. "And you've shown me what kindness looks like. Eli Carter, I thought the world forgot about it." He reached across the table, rough hand brushing hers. "Then maybe we remind each other." Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the plains, a low growl in the distance. Neither of them noticed at first. But then, Eli frowned, glancing toward the window. "Storm's cumin." Clara followed his gaze. The horizon flickered with lightning, purple and silver. "Big one?" she asked. "Looks that way." He stood, pulling on his coat. "I'll check the barn, make sure the stock's secured. You and Tommy stay inside." Clara rose too. "I'll help." Eli shook his head gently. "You've done enough. I'll be back before the stew cools." But the stew went cold before he returned. Rain began to lash against the windows, wind howling through the cracks. Clara paced, clutching Tommy close as the storm grew louder. Then above the thunder she heard it. A gunshot. Her heart froze. She ran to the window, peering into the dark sheets of rain. Lightning flashed, and for a split second she saw 2 shadowed figures by the barn. One was Eli. She knew his stance, anywhere. The other, tall, broad, cruelly familiar. Caleb Rourke. He'd come back. Clara's blood turned to ice. She grabbed her shawl, heart pounding. "Stay inside, Tommy," she whispered. "Don't move, no matter what you hear." The boy clung to her sleeve, eyes wide. "Mama," she kissed his forehead, forcing a brave smile. "Mama's just going to help, Papa." Then she ran into the storm. Lightning split the sky as she raced across the yard, skirts soaked, wind screaming in her ears. Another shot cracked the air. She stumbled, heart hammering, and prayed, "God, please don't let me lose him too." Rain pounded the earth like drum. The wind howled through the valley, ripping at fences and trees. The Carter Ranch, once a quiet place of warmth, was now swallowed by chaos. Clara ran barefoot through the mud, skirts clinging to her legs, lightning flashing white across the sky. Every few seconds, the world lit up long enough for her to see 2 figures struggling near the barn doors. Eli and Rourke. She stumbled to a halt behind the water trough, chest heaving, heart screaming in her ears. Rourke had a pistol, his voice rising above the storm. "You thought you could take what's mine?" Rourke shouted, his laughter cruel and sharp. "I bought her, Carter. You can't just steal another man's property." Eli's voice was steady, despite the thunder. "She ain't property. She's free on. You'll never touch her again." Clara's hands shook as she crouched lower. She spotted a fallen pitchfork half buried in the mud nearby. Her breath quickened. Rourke raised his gun. You think I came all this way for not? She owes me. She belongs to me. Eli moved fast, lunging forward, knocking Rourke's arm aside just as the gun went off. The shot tore into the barn wall, splintering wood inches from Eli's shoulder. They grappled, boots slipping in the wet dirt, Rourke cursing and swinging wildly. Clara couldn't stay hidden. Not while Eli was fighting for her. She grabbed the pitchfork, heart hammering, and sprinted through the rain. Eli, she cried. Rourke turned toward the voice just long enough for Eli to land a hard punch to his jaw. Rourke stumbled, falling backward into the mud. Clara stood trembling a few paces away, the pitchfork raised. Leave us alone, Caleb, she shouted, her voice fierce, trembling with rage. You'll never hurt me again. Rourke spat blood, glaring up at her. You think you can threaten me, girl? You forget who made you. God made me, she said through clenched teeth. Not you. Lightning split the sky, throwing their faces into stark relief. Eli standing tall, bruised and bleeding. Clara with mud on her face and fire in her eyes. Rourke sneered. Then I'll just kill your new savior first. Then you'll remember where you belong. He lunged for his gun. Eli moved instantly, but before he could reach him, Clara swung the pitchfork. The wooden handle cracked across Rourke's wrist. The gun flew from his hand, landing in the mud. Rourke roared, grabbing Clara by the arm. You filthy! But Eli was already there. He hit Rourke with a force born of fury and love, slamming him into the barn wall. Boards shuddered. Rourke's head struck wood, and he slid to the ground, dazed. Eli grabbed the gun, chest heaving, eyes blazing. He aimed it straight at Rourke's chest. For a moment, all sounds seemed to stop. Even the rain held its breath. Do it, Rourke hissed, blood dripping from his mouth. You don't have the guts. Eli's finger trembled on the trigger. Clara stepped closer, her hand on his arm. Eli, she whispered. Don't, he's not worth your soul. Eli's jaw worked, his breath ragged. Finally, with a growl of disgust, he lowered the gun. You're right. He threw it into the mud and looked down at Rourke. You'll ride out of this valley tonight. If I ever see you again, I'll bury you myself. Rourke glared up at him, face pale. You'll regret this, Carter. Eli hauled him to his feet, shoved him toward his horse, and spat. Not as much as you will. Rourke mounted, clutching his bleeding hand, and disappeared into the storm. When he was gone, Eli turned, breath heavy, rain running down his face. You all right? He asked, voice breaking with concern. Clara stared at him, shaking, tears mixing with rain. You could have died. He took a step closer. So could you? She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. I couldn't lose you. I couldn't. He held her tight, his arms strong and trembling. You won't, he whispered fiercely. Not while I still breathe. Thunder rumbled again, softer now, fading into the distance. The worst had passed. When they finally pulled apart, their eyes met exhausted, but full of something undeniable. Clara smiled weakly through her tears. You said once I belonged here. Maybe I finally believe it. Eli brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, his voice low and steady. You don't just belong here, Clara. You are here. You're the heart of this place now. And in that storm-torn night, with lightning fading and rain softening into mist, two broken souls finally began to heal for real, and together. The morning started like any other dew glistening on the fields. The scent of fresh bread drifting through the kitchen. Tommy's laughter faint from the barn where he chased chickens. Clara hummed as she wiped the table, her heart lighter than it had been in years. But sometimes, peace carries the quiet before a storm. Eli was out by the corral when the sound of hooves broke the calm. Dust billowed from the road as three riders appeared, strangers by the cut of their coats and the shine of their guns. Clara stepped to the porch, her hands still damp from washing, unease crawling through her chest. The lead rider dismounted with a grin that froze her blood. Caleb Rourke, the man who had once owned her. Well, Caleb drawled, swaggering forward like a man who'd come to collect his winnings. If it ain't my lost investment, you've been a hard woman to track down. Clara May, her throat went dry. She couldn't move. Every bruise, every scream, every dark night came rushing back like ghosts in her mind. Eli walked up, stepping between them without hesitation. His stance was calm, but his hand rested near his holster. You got business here, Mr. Caleb's smirk widened. That woman standing behind you is my property, bought and paid for before she ran off. I'm here to take her back. Eli's jaw tightened. Ain't no man owns another soul in this territory. She's free. Caleb spat into the dirt. That's for me to decide. I got papers. Eli's gray eyes flashed. And I got a rifle. The ranch hands, hearing the commotion, came running from the barn, guns half. Tommy peeked out from behind a haystack, clutching his little wooden horse, fear in his wide eyes. Clara's heart cracked at the sight. Caleb laughed, a low, mean sound. You really think you can stand against me, Carter? I've got friends in Red Creek Loman who remember me generous. You get in my way, and I'll have this whole ranch burned to the ground. Eli didn't flinch. You'll try, he said, voice calm as thunder before rain. For a tense moment, no one moved. The sun hung low, the air thick with dust and silence. Then Caleb took a slow step closer, his gaze sliding to Clara. You think he's gonna save you again, sweetheart? He's just another fool playing hero. Sooner or later, they all turn. Clara trembled, but she forced herself to stand straighter. I'm not yours, Caleb, she said, her voice shaking but firm. You lost any right to me when you chained me like an animal. The man's smirk faltered. You got a sharp tongue for a woman bought off the block. Eli took one step forward, his shadow falling across Caleb's boots. You'll ride out of here right now, he said evenly, before my patience runs thin. You come back again, and you won't ride at all. Caleb's face darkened. He spat again, glancing at the armed ranch hands, then at Clara's trembling form. Finally, he chuckled bitterly. Fine, keep her. But don't think this is over. Carter, you can't hide her forever. He mounted his horse, spurring it hard, the others following. The thunder of hooves faded down the dusty road. Clara sank to her knees, her body shaking. The memories clawed at her chest, the sound of chains echoing in her ears. Eli knelt beside her, his hand hovering but not touching until she looked up. He's gone, he said softly. You're safe. Tears broke free, hot and unstoppable. He'll come back, she whispered. Men like him always do. Eli's eyes darkened. Then he'll meet a man who ain't afraid of him. Clara looked at him really. Looked at the way his jaw set, the fire in his eyes. He wasn't just a kind man anymore. He was a wall between her and the world. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Your protection. Your kindness. Eli shook his head. You don't earn kindness, Clara. You're owed it. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. Eli stood, watching over her until her breathing slowed. Then, gently, he placed his coat around her shoulders. From the doorway, Tommy's small voice called out uncertain, trembling, but brave. Mama. Clara froze. Her heart stopped. Then she looked up, tears blurring her vision. Tommy stood there, eyes full of fear and hope. Eli turned to her, his voice soft. You can answer him, if you want. Clara rose slowly, walked to the boy, and knelt down. She touched his cheek, smiling through tears. Yes, sweetheart. Mama's here. Eli turned away, blinking hard, the corners of his mouth tight. The wind carried the last trace of Caleb Rourke's threat into the distance. For now, the ghosts of the past had retreated. But both Clara and Eli knew they would not rest forever. The days after Caleb Rourke's visit passed quietly, almost too quietly. The sky stretched wide and endless above the Carter ranch. But even in the golden calm of evening, Clara felt a weight pressing on her chest. Every creak of the porch made her flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like hooves. Eli noticed, though he never said a word. He just worked harder repairing fences, keeping close when she moved around the ranch, always making sure she wasn't alone when the dark settled in. And wide-eyed Tommy stayed near her side like a little shadow. One afternoon, Clara found him in the garden, trying to dig with a spoon. His brow was furrowed, lips pressed in concentration. She knelt beside him, her pink calico skirt brushing the dirt. What are you planting, sweetheart? She asked softly. Tommy looked up, blue eyes bright under his straw hat. Papa says we can grow anything if we take care of it, so I'm planting a flower for you. Mama, her breath caught. That one word, Mama, felt like the sun breaking through a long, cold storm. She swallowed hard. You called me Mama. The boy nodded matter-of-factly. 'Cause you are. You make me pancakes, and you tuck me in. My real mama's in heaven. Papa says she's happy when we're happy. So, I think she'd want me to call you that. Tears blurred her vision. She reached out, brushing a bit of dirt from his cheek. You're a very smart boy, Tommy Carter. He grinned, missing front tooth and all, then held out a handful of seeds. Help me plant him. Together they dug small holes in the dry earth, dropping seeds one by one. The simple act, the warmth of the sun, the sound of a child's laughter, it was more healing than all the words she'd never said. When Eli returned from the fields that evening, he stopped by the fence, watching them. Clara's hair was loose, glinting in the last orange light. She was laughing, really laughing, for the first time since she'd come to his ranch. Tommy ran toward him, shouting, Papa, Mama planted flowers with me. Eli froze for a heartbeat. Mama, he looked at Clara, eyes softening, a slow smile curving his lips. Did she now? Clara blushed, wiping her hands on her apron. Your son's quite the farmer. He said the seeds need love to grow. Eli chuckled. Reckon he's right about that. That night, after Tommy fell asleep, the house was quiet except for the low crackle of the fire. Clara sat by the hearth, mending a shirt. Eli leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a look that made her heart flutter and ache all at once. You've done something I thought no one could do, he said softly. She glanced up. What's that? He smiled faintly. You brought laughter back into this house. Her needle paused mid. You give me too much credit. Eli stepped closer, the lamplight warming his weathered face. No, I don't. This place used to be full of silence after Sarah passed. Tommy stopped talking much. I stopped everything else. But now he smiles again. And he stopped, shaking his head as if afraid to say more. Clara's throat tightened. Eli. He looked at her then, eyes full of something deep and unspoken. You don't owe me anything, Clara, but I hope you know you're safe here. You and Tommy, you belong. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, the air thick with warmth and unshed tears. Then Clara whispered, "It feels like home." Eli's gaze lingered on her face. "Then that's all I could ever ask." Outside, a soft rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. It smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Clara thought of the seeds Tommy had planted, buried beneath the soil, waiting for the rain to wake them. Maybe hearts were like that too, buried deep for too long, waiting for kindness to make them bloom. When she went to check on Tommy later, she found him sleeping peacefully, one arm wrapped around his little wooden horse. She brushed his hair back, whispering, "Good night, my sweet boy." Eli stood at the doorway, watching quietly. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the fear that had shadowed her since the auction began to fade. Because for the first time, she wasn't a woman running from her past, she was a mother, a protector, and a part of something that finally felt like family. The storm rolled away before dawn, leaving the land washed clean and quiet. The sun rose slowly over the soaked valley, turning every drop of rain into gold. The air smelled of wet earth, smoke, and life. Inside the farmhouse, a single lamp burned low. Eli sat in the old rocking chair, his arm wrapped in a bandage, a line of dried blood along his jaw. He stared into the dying embers of the fire. Thoughts heavy and unspoken. Clara moved softly around the room, her shawl draped over her shoulders. She poured water into a basin, her hands trembling just slightly. "Hold still," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "You'll reopen the wound." Eli smiled faintly. "You don't have to fuss over me, Clara." Her eyes glimmered in the firelight. "I nearly lost you last night, Eli Carter. You don't get to tell me what I have to do." He chuckled low, wincing as she dabbed at a cut. Fair enough. For a long moment, there was only the soft sound of her tending him the dip of cloth and water, the sigh of his breathing. The storm outside had ended, but between them something new and tender stirred, something stronger than fear. "Where's Tommy?" Eli asked quietly. "Still asleep," Clara said, her voice softening. "He was frightened. Poor thing. I told him, everything's all right now." Eli looked at her then, eyes shadowed with gratitude. "He trusts you more than anyone, Clara. You've given him back his childhood." She met his gaze, her fingers pausing on his arm. "You gave me back my life, Eli. Maybe we both needed saving." Silence stretched between them, warm and full. The first light of morning poured through the window, painting her face in gold. Eli swallowed hard. "I meant what I said last night. You're the heart of this home. Now, you and Tommy, you're all I've got. And maybe," he hesitated, the words heavy on his tongue, "maybe that's all I'll ever need." Clara looked down, heart pounding. "Eli." He took her hand gently, his rough fingers warm around hers. "I know you've been through hell. I know what Rourke took from you can't be undone. But I want you to know, you're not someone's possession. You're a woman with strength, grace, and a heart that makes this whole place come alive again." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "No one's ever spoken to me like that. You make me feel seen." Eli smiled softly. "Then I'm doing my job right." She laughed through her tears, the sound breaking something tight inside both of them. For the first time in years, she wasn't a victim. She wasn't an outcast. She was part of something beautiful. Just then, tiny footsteps padded across the floorboards. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his blonde hair sticking up in all directions. He rubbed his eyes sleepily. "Papa, Mama." Clara's breath caught again at the word. This time, she didn't correct him. She didn't even hesitate. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, kneeling down and opening her arms. Tommy ran straight into them, hugging her tight. "I was scared, Mama." The thunder was loud. She kissed the top of his head. "It's all over now. You're safe." Eli rose from the chair, his hand resting on Tommy's shoulder. "Storm's gone. Son, we all made it through." The boy looked up, his small face brightening. "Can we see the flowers, Papa? The ones me and Mama planted?" Eli smiled. "Reckon that's a fine idea." Together, they stepped outside into the soft morning light. The ranch lay quiet under a sky washed clean. The soil was damp and rich, glistening with new life. Near the fence, tiny green shoots pushed through the earth-omis flowers. Finally waking, Clara knelt beside them, tears shining in her eyes. "They're growing," she whispered. Eli stood behind her, his shadow falling over hers. "Told you love could make anything grow." She looked up at him, smiling. "Even hearts." He met her gaze, the answer written clear in his eyes. "Especially hearts." For a long, golden moment, time seemed to stop. The wind blew softly through the grass, carrying the scent of rain and blossoms. Clara felt the world shift, not in fear this time, but in peace. Behind them the house stood tall again, no longer haunted by ghosts or loneliness. Inside its walls was laughter, warmth, and a promise that tomorrow would be better than yesterday. Clara took Tommy's hand in one of hers and Eli's in the other. "Let's go home," she said simply, and together, they did. The weeks after the storm passed softly, like a long exhale after years of holding breath. Spring deepened into summer, and the Carter ranch thrummed with quiet life again, hens clucking, horses neighing, Tommy's laughter echoing across the fields. The valley, once a place of sorrow, had bloomed, and so had the people who called it home. Clara spent her mornings in the garden, hands buried in the warm soil, tending to Tommy's flowers that now stood tall and proud. Each time she saw them, she remembered the storm, the fair, and how love had taken root in its place. Eli watched her from the porch sometimes, coffee mug in hand, his heart full and steady. The woman who had once been trembling and chained now stood free in the sunlight, her hair loose in the wind, her laughter like music. He'd loved before, but this was different. This wasn't young passion or fleeting warmth. This was the quiet, fierce love of a man who had known loss and found light again. That evening, the three of them sat together under the oak tree near the corral. The sky blazed pink and gold, and Tommy was chasing fireflies, his giggles filling the air. Eli turned to Clara. "You ever think how strange life is?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "All the time, He gestured toward the horizon. "A few months back, I was a man with nothing but an empty house and an aching heart. And you were fighting to survive in a world that gave you no kindness." Her gaze softened, and somehow, those two lonely paths crossed right here. "Yeah?" he said, voice low. "Right here." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets. Then Eli turned toward her, the sunset light catching the lines on his face. "Clara, I ain't never been a man of many words, but there's something I've been wanting to say." Her heart quickened. "Eli." He reached into his pocket, pulling out something smaller, simple silver band. Dulled by time, but polished clean. "It was Sarah's," he said softly. "She'd want me to use it again. She'd want me to be happy." Clara's hand went to her mouth, eyes wide. "Eli." He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing her skin. "You came here in chains, Clara. Folks laughed when I brought you home. They said I was a fool, but they didn't see what I saw: the strength, the kindness, the courage. You saved this ranch. You saved my boy. You saved me." Tears welled in her eyes. "Eli, you don't owe me anything. I'd have done it all anyway." He smiled, shaking his head. "This ain't about owing. It's about wanting. I want you to stay here, not as a helper or a guest, but as my wife, as Tommy's mother, as the woman who makes this place whole again." For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. The world blurred around her, the fireflies, the golden sky, the hum of summer. Then she whispered, voice trembling, "Eli Carter, I thought no one would ever look at me without seeing what I'd been through. But you saw who I could become." He squeezed her hand. "Then say you'll stay, Clara." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Yes," she breathed. "I'll stay. I'll be yours. I'll be home." Eli smiled, a real, full smile that reached his eyes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that small, perfect moment, the past washed away. Tommy came running toward them, holding a jar glowing with fireflies. "Mama, Papa, look." Eli laughed, pulling the boy into his arms. "That's something, son. You caught the whole sky." Clara leaned into Eli's side, one arm around Tommy, the other resting on her heart. "Feels like we did too," she whispered. The wind carried the scent of rain and wildflowers, the air soft and alive. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, the three of them stood together, a family born not of blood or chance, but of mercy, courage, and love that refused to die. And far away, in the same town that had once laughed at the woman in chains, whispers began to change. They spoke now not of shame, but of a rancher's honor, a woman's strength, and the little boy who'd planted flowers that grew through stone. Because sometimes, in the Wild West, where hearts are hard and fates are cruel, miracles don't come with thunder. They come quietly, like a promise whispered after the storm.